December 30th, 1970. Las Vegas police find Sonny Liston dead in his home. But the circumstances don't add up. The former heavyweight champion, who terrified every fighter in the ring, who knocked out Floyd Patterson in the first round twice, is discovered days after his death with needle marks on his arms. Here's the problem. Liston was terrified of needles his entire life. The autopsy results were contradictory, the timeline suspicious, and decades later, nobody can agree on how the most feared man in boxing actually died. But to understand what really happened to Sonny Liston, we have to go back where it all began. Charles Liston's childhood reads like something out of a horror story. And the worst part is, it was all true. Born around 1930 on a sharecropping plantation in Arkansas, he entered the world as one of 24 to 25 children in a family where survival meant more than just making it through another day. The crushing poverty that defined every moment of his early life never changed, no matter who was telling the story. His father, Toby Liston, was a sharecropper who ruled his massive family with brutal violence. The beatings weren't just punishment, they were a way of life. Tobe used his fists, belts, and whatever else he could grab to keep his children in line. The scars these beatings left on Sonny weren't just physical, they were visible later in life and created a young man who understood that violence was how problems got solved and respect got earned. The Liston family lived in extreme poverty on the plantation. Food was scarce, and when there was something to eat, the biggest and strongest got fed first. Sonny learned early that being tough meant eating, and being weak meant going hungry. The cotton fields offered no escape from this misery. They were just another form of prison where children worked from sunrise to sunset for pennies. School wasn't an option for most of the Liston children. They were needed in the fields, and education seemed pointless when your entire world consisted of picking cotton and avoiding your father's fists. Sonny never learned to read or write properly, a handicap that would follow him his entire life. His illiteracy trapped him in a cycle where legitimate opportunities stayed out of reach and illegal ones looked increasingly attractive. When Sonny was a teenager, he made his escape. He ran away to St. Louis to live with his mother, Helen, who had left Tobe years earlier. He thought he was heading toward a better life, but St. Louis in the 1940s offered few opportunities for an illiterate teenager with no skills beyond surviving abuse and picking cotton. Helen struggled to support herself, let alone feed another mouth. The streets of St. Louis became Sonny's real education. He learned that crime paid better than any honest work available to someone with his background. Armed robbery, burglary, and assault. These weren't moral choices for Liston, they were economic necessities. The violence his father had taught him proved useful in a different context. Other criminals feared him, and fear translated into respect and money. The arrests started piling up before he turned 20. Each time he got caught, the charges got more serious. Assault with intent to kill. Armed robbery. The pattern was clear. Sonny Liston was becoming a career criminal and a dangerous one. His size and willingness to use violence made him someone that even hardened street criminals didn't want to cross. By his early 20s, Liston was headed for a life behind bars when he was sent to Missouri State Penitentiary in 1950. Prison would change his life. The penitentiary's boxing program and its chaplain introduced him to the sport that would become his way out. Inside Missouri State Penitentiary, a Catholic priest saw something in Sonny Liston that no one else had bothered to look for. Father Alois Stevens ran a boxing program designed to give inmates an outlet for their aggression. But what he discovered when Liston first put on gloves was raw, terrifying power that made grown men back away from the ring. Stevens had seen tough inmates before, but Liston was different. His first sparring session ended when his opponent refused to continue after taking a single body shot. The next volunteer lasted 2 rounds before claiming he had injured his hand. He hadn't landed a punch. When professional boxer Thurman Wilson sparred with Liston during a prison exhibition, observers were convinced they were watching something exceptional. Word spread through the prison population fast. Don't spar with the new guy unless you want to get hurt. The priest recognized that Liston's natural gifts needed proper development, so he brought in trainer Johnny Tocco to work with him. What Tocco found was a fighting machine that nature had built specifically for destruction. Liston's reach measured 84 inches. longer than most men who stood 6 inches taller than him. His hands were massive, his shoulders impossibly wide, and his punching power was unlike anything Tocco had seen in 20 years of training fighters. The training methods they developed were as unconventional as the man himself. Liston ran his road work in heavy work boots to build leg strength that would let him plant his feet and generate devastating power. When proper equipment wasn't available, they improvised, using prison laundry bags stuffed with rags as heavy bags, and having Liston shadow box against stone walls to build timing and accuracy. Tocco also had him do neck-strengthening drills that would become part of his signature training routine. Tocco worked on transforming Liston's street fighting instincts into technical weapons. His jab became legendary, not just for its power, but for its precision and timing. Most heavyweights used their jabs to set up bigger punches, but Liston's jab was a finisher all by itself. He learned to use his incredible reach to keep opponents at the perfect distance, where he could hit them but they couldn't hit back. These unconventional training methods helped develop his famously devastating jab and left hook into weapons that could end fights instantly. The prison program allowed him to channel his natural aggression into disciplined technique. The street thug who solved problems with blind rage became a calculating, disciplined fighter who could control his violence and use it strategically. The transformation was mental as much as physical. Liston learned to think while he was hurting opponents. His amateur success started building buzz in boxing circles that reached far beyond prison walls. Sports writers began mentioning the convict heavyweight who was destroying everyone they put in front of him. Boxing managers started showing up at the prison, hoping to get first crack at signing him when he was released. Father Stephen's support even helped secure Liston an early parole. When he left Jefferson City in 1952, he walked out as a different man. Physically imposing, technically improved, and suddenly on boxing's radar. His left hook had become a weapon of mass destruction, his jab could break ribs, and his ring intelligence had turned him into a thinking man's killer. But his criminal past and rumored mob connections would follow him every step of his professional journey, creating opportunities and obstacles in equal measure as he prepared to terrorize the heavyweight division. Liston's professional debut in 1953 set the tone for everything that would follow. He knocked out Don Smith in the first round, and the boxing world took notice. Not just because of the knockout, but because of how Smith looked afterward. Like he'd been hit by a truck. The knockout streak that followed was unlike anything the heavyweight division had seen in years. Liston destroyed Ben Wise in one round. He flattened Ponce de Leon so brutally that the fighter's corner threw in the towel before the referee could count him out. Boxing managers started having trouble finding fighters willing to step in the ring with him. His criminal background and alleged mob connections were accelerating his rise in ways that made boxing insiders uncomfortable. In 1958, Liston's manager was Pep Barone, a known frontman for racketeers tied to Frankie Carbo and Blinky Palermo. While other promising heavyweights waited years for quality opponents, this connection meant Liston was getting fast-tracked to fights with established contenders despite his limited ring time. 2 decisive victories established Liston as the division's most dangerous fighter and made him impossible to ignore. His 1959 win over Cleveland Williams, stopped in the 3rd round, was widely regarded as one of his most impressive performances. Williams was a skilled heavyweight who many considered a future champion, but Liston demolished him completely. The 1960 rematch lasted just 2 rounds, proving the first fight wasn't a fluke. That same year, his 12-round decision over Eddie Machen in September 1960 removed any doubt about his championship credentials. The discomfort with Liston's rapid ascent created tension throughout the sport's hierarchy. Boxing officials preferred champions they could control, fighters who would play nice with the media and represent the sport properly. Liston was the opposite, a convicted felon with mob ties who barely spoke to reporters and intimidated everyone around him. But his talent was undeniable, and his knockout victories were bringing in television money that nobody wanted to turn away. His fighting style was calculated brutality. He would methodically break down opponents piece by piece, targeting their body until they couldn't breathe, then finishing them with shots to the head. His jab didn't just score points, it broke ribs and collapsed lungs. Heavyweight contender Zora Folley later admitted he had nightmares about fighting Liston months before their bout was even scheduled. The result was fast matches, big TV dates, and a run of stoppages that left Patterson's handlers with little excuse to avoid the fight. Each victory added to his reputation as an unstoppable force who could end fights with either hand at any moment. The pressure for a title shot became impossible to ignore. By late 1961 and into 1962, Liston had cleared the division. The title fight with Floyd Patterson became inevitable. The boxing world was about to witness a collision between two completely different men. America's wholesome champion against the most feared challenger in heavyweight history. The fight itself settled every question in the most brutal way possible. Floyd Patterson entered Comiskey Park as America's wholesome heavyweight champion. He left as a broken man who'd been destroyed by a force of nature. The contrast between the two fighters couldn't have been more stark. Patterson represented everything the boxing establishment wanted in a champion. Articulate, well-mannered, and genuinely likable. He was the kind of fighter who gave interviews about his love of reading and his plans after boxing. Liston was his complete opposite, a scowling ex-convict who barely spoke to reporters and looked like he wanted to hurt everyone in the room. The build-up to September 25, 1962, centered on one question. Could Patterson's speed and boxing technique overcome Liston's raw power and intimidation? Patterson had quick hands and excellent footwork. He could move in and out, land combinations, and avoid getting hit by slower opponents. His camp believed that Liston's criminal background had made him mentally soft, that the ex-convict would crumble under the pressure of fighting for boxing's biggest prize. But Liston held a roughly 25-pound weight advantage, 214 pounds to Patterson's 189. That suggested a different outcome. They were catastrophically wrong. From the opening bell, Liston stalked Patterson like a predator hunting wounded prey. Observers described Patterson's behavior as unusually tentative, and Liston's power reduced Patterson's chances quickly. 45 seconds into the fight, that moment came. Liston threw a left hook that caught Patterson flush on the jaw. The sound of the punch echoed through the stadium, a sickening thud that made people in the front rows wince. Patterson went down hard, his legs betraying him as he tried to get back up. He managed to beat the count, but something had changed in his eyes. The champion looked hurt, confused, and suddenly very vulnerable. Liston moved in for the kill with the cold efficiency of a professional assassin. He landed another left hook, then a right cross that snapped Patterson's head back. The champion staggered backward, his guard dropping, his legs wobbling. Liston followed up with a combination that put Patterson on the canvas for the second and final time. The crowd sat in stunned silence as referee Frank Sikora counted Patterson out. 2 minutes and 6 seconds, 2:06 of round one, that's all it took for Liston to destroy America's champion and claim the heavyweight title. Patterson lay motionless on the canvas while Liston stood over him, showing no emotion, no celebration, just the cold satisfaction of a job completed. This brief explosion of violence changed the entire landscape of heavyweight boxing. The sport's most wholesome champion had been brutalized by its most feared challenger. Boxing writers struggled to describe what they had witnessed. After the fight, Liston returned to Philadelphia expecting a hero's welcome, but was met by almost no fans. A rejection that stung despite his victory. Questions about whether Patterson could ever recover dominated the sports pages, but the July 1963 rematch answered them definitively. The second fight lasted 4 seconds longer, 2 minutes and 10 seconds of the same systematic destruction. Liston knocked Patterson down twice again, proving the first fight wasn't luck or a fluke, he was simply unstoppable. That demolition confirmed to many observers that Liston was the best heavyweight in the world. But it also intensified the public's discomfort with him as champion. Being the most feared fighter in boxing came with a price that Liston wasn't prepared to pay. The heavyweight title brought Liston power, but not acceptance. America refused to embrace a champion with his dark past. The media treated him like a criminal who happened to box rather than a boxer with a criminal history. Sports writers couldn't get past his convictions and alleged mob connections. They wrote about his intimidating stare and his refusal to smile for cameras. Every interview became an interrogation about his past rather than a discussion of his boxing skills. His criminal background and alleged mob ties created institutional opposition that went far beyond typical media criticism. President Kennedy and other officials had expressed concern about boxers with mob connections representing American sports. Civic leaders and parts of the black community, including the NAACP, publicly complained about Liston representing African Americans because of his criminal past. The boxing establishment had never dealt with a champion quite like him. Previous heavyweight champions had been either war heroes like Joe Louis or clean-cut Americans like Floyd Patterson. Press conferences became hostile confrontations where reporters asked loaded questions designed to make Liston look bad. When they asked about his criminal past, he gave short, angry answers. When they pressed him about his connections to underworld figures, he either denied them or refused to respond. His discomfort with the media created a cycle where his hostile responses made him look guilty of whatever they were implying. The rejection was visible and painful. He was booed at public appearances, denied the celebratory reception he expected at airports, and subjected to racialized press coverage that compared him to dehumanizing stereotypes. Promoters found it difficult to get sponsors for his fights. Television networks were reluctant to feature him prominently in their boxing coverage. Boxing commissions treated him with suspicion, looking for any reason to strip him of his title or prevent him from fighting. Racial and social factors contributed to his rejection by mainstream America in ways that went beyond just his criminal record. A black heavyweight champion with mob connections represented everything that white America feared about boxing becoming too urban and too connected to criminal elements. The sports establishment preferred champions they could control and promote as positive role models. What made Liston's situation more complicated was his complex personality. In public, he was intimidating and hostile, scowling at cameras and giving reporters one-word answers. But people who knew him personally, his wife Geraldine, trainers and friends, remembered him as generous and good with children, often giving away money to kids in poor neighborhoods and supporting charities quietly without seeking publicity. The emergence of a young, loud challenger named Cassius Clay created the perfect contrast that boxing needed. Clay represented everything Liston wasn't: young, charismatic, articulate, and media-friendly. He was an Olympic gold medalist with no criminal background and connections to the mainstream boxing establishment. Where Liston scowled and intimidated, Clay smiled and entertained. Clay's rise through the heavyweight ranks created growing anticipation for an eventual showdown with Liston. The boxing world saw it as a clash between the sport's dark past and its bright future. Into this climate walked Cassius Clay, loud, marketable, and everything Liston wasn't, setting up the clash that would define both men. February 25, 1964. The night when boxing's most feared champion met his match against an opponent who fought him with words before they ever entered the ring. Cassius Clay had been waging psychological warfare against Liston for months, and it was working in ways nobody expected. The trash-talking that made other fighters laugh was getting under Liston's skin. Clay called him ugly, old, and washed up. He showed up at Liston's training sessions uninvited, shouting insults and disrupting his workouts. For a man who intimidated everyone around him, being publicly mocked by a 22-year-old kid was infuriating. The weigh-in at Miami Beach turned into a circus that exposed cracks in Liston's usually unshakable composure. Clay arrived acting like a madman, screaming and carrying on, while Liston sat stone-faced. But something strange happened as the confrontation continued. Clay's apparent fear and hysteria transformed into confident aggression. His pulse rate, which had been dangerously high from his theatrics, dropped to normal levels within minutes. Meanwhile, Liston looked genuinely annoyed for the first time anyone could remember. The fight itself showed how Clay's speed and movement frustrated Liston in ways no previous opponent had managed. Clay danced around the ring, throwing quick combinations before moving out of range. His jab was fast enough to beat Liston's legendary left hook to the target. For the first time in years, Liston looked his age. His timing was off, his footwork sluggish, and his trademark intimidation factor wasn't working. Clay's youth and conditioning became more obvious as the rounds wore on. While Liston's punches came slower and with less accuracy, Clay maintained his speed and started landing cleaner shots. By the fifth round, Clay was winning clearly on all scorecards. Liston's corner was growing desperate, but their fighter was showing signs of fatigue that his opponents had never seen before. The pivotal moment came between the sixth and seventh rounds when Liston couldn't answer the bell, claiming a shoulder injury. His corner announced that the champion had hurt his left shoulder and couldn't continue. Clay jumped around the ring celebrating while chaos erupted throughout the Miami Beach Convention Hall. Fans who had paid good money to see the feared champion fight were booing and demanding refunds. The immediate controversy centered on one question: was the injury real, or had the champion quit under pressure? Doctors later examined Liston's arm and reported a torn tendon, but some in Liston's camp later called the diagnosis suspect. His supporters pointed out that he had never quit before and had fought through injuries his entire career. His critics argued that he had been dominated by a younger, faster fighter and used the injury as an excuse to avoid further punishment. The arena descended into complete chaos as fans and officials struggled to understand what had happened. Questions about Liston's heart and determination would plague him for the rest of his career. Clay was the new champion, but the manner of Liston's defeat created doubts that demanded answers. What made this unprecedented, no heavyweight champion had quit on his stool since 1919, was that it happened to the most feared fighter of his generation. Liston left Miami under a cloud, and the rematch 14 months later would create an even deeper divide in how people saw him. May 25, 1965, Lewiston, Maine. In less than 2 minutes, Sonny Liston's reputation would be destroyed by a punch most people couldn't even see. The rematch had been moved from Boston to this small Maine town after legal and licensing troubles with the Massachusetts State Athletic Commission. Both fighters faced enormous pressure to prove the legitimacy of their first encounter. Ali needed to show he was a real champion, not just a lucky kid who caught a break. Liston needed to prove he wasn't a quitter who folded under pressure. The crowd at Central Maine Youth Center was smaller and less enthusiastic than Miami Beach. Only 2,434 people showed up to watch boxing's most controversial rematch. The infamous Phantom Punch came early in the first round. Ali threw what appeared to be a quick, short right hand that barely seemed to graze Liston's jaw. It looked more like a flick than a power punch. Liston went down immediately, rolling onto his back with his arms spread wide. The crowd erupted in confusion and anger. The officiating confusion made everything worse. Referee Jersey Joe Walcott failed to send Ali to a neutral corner and didn't start his count immediately. Instead, he let Ali stand over Liston while timekeeper Francis McDonough counted at ringside. By the time Walcott realized what was happening and tried to restore order, nobody knew how long Liston had been down or whether a proper count had occurred. The official time was listed as 1 minute into the first round, but the actual sequence remained unclear. Respected boxing voices were split on what they witnessed. Jose Torres, Tex Maul, and Jim Murray judged the punch legitimate. Torres called it a perfect short right hand that caught Liston off guard. But Jack Dempsey, Joe Louis, and other contemporaries publicly expressed suspicion of a fix. 3 major theories emerged. The punch was real but nearly invisible, connecting at the perfect angle to drop Liston. Liston took a dive because he was more valuable to certain interests as a loser than a winner. Or he had been threatened and went down to avoid serious consequences. Each theory had supporters who could point to evidence supporting their position. The controversy exploded immediately and has never been resolved. Fans booed and threw debris into the ring. Many demanded refunds. The punch defined both fighters' legacies in completely opposite ways. For Ali, it became evidence of his mysterious knockout power and boxing genius. For Liston, it became proof that he was either a quitter or connected to fight-fixing schemes. The former champion would spend his remaining years trying to rebuild a reputation that this single moment had completely shattered. Whether the punch was real or fake, it marked the end of Liston as a serious heavyweight contender and turned him into boxing's most controversial figure. His only option now was to start over somewhere else, in a place where fallen champions could reinvent themselves or disappear entirely. Liston spent time in Denver after losing his title, working with Father Edward Murphy and trying to rebuild his life. But by the late 1960s, he had relocated to Las Vegas. The desert city was booming, with new casinos opening every month and entertainment money flowing like water. For a fallen champion willing to take any opportunity, it seemed like the ideal place to start over. His attempts to continue boxing faced immediate credibility problems after the Phantom Punch controversy. American promoters wouldn't touch him, so his management team had to look overseas for meaningful fights. His comeback streak in Sweden during 1966-67 saw him stop several lesser opponents, keeping him active but doing nothing to restore his reputation back home. The quality of his opponents told the real story of his fall from grace. Instead of facing top contenders, Liston was fighting club-level heavyweights and aging veterans looking for one last payday. The end came on December 6, 1969, when Leotis Martin knocked him out in the 9th round, effectively ending his bid for another title shot. Each victory before that had felt hollow, a reminder of how far he had fallen from terrorizing championship contenders in packed stadiums. Vegas offered opportunities beyond boxing that seemed tailor-made for an intimidating ex-champion. Casino owners hired him for security work and promotional appearances. His mere presence at gaming tables was enough to keep troublemakers in line. He appeared in a few films and TV spots, seeking alternative income and visibility, though these entertainment ventures never developed into major opportunities. His involvement in Las Vegas's scene introduced him to a new cast of characters. Some were legitimate business owners looking to capitalize on his fame. Others operated in the gray areas where entertainment, gambling, and organized crime intersected. Vegas had always attracted people with complicated pasts, and Liston fit right into this world of second chances and reinvention. The attempts to rehabilitate his image included charity work and community appearances that showed his gentler side. He worked with youth boxing programs and made donations to local causes. These efforts earned him some positive press coverage, but the shadow of the Phantom Punch controversy followed him everywhere. Every interview included questions about Ali and the mysterious knockout that had ended his championship dreams. His complex relationship with both legitimate business owners and underworld figures created a dangerous balancing act. Liston needed money and was willing to take opportunities from anyone offering them. This desperation made him vulnerable to people who might not have had his best interests at heart. Financial problems mounted despite his various income sources. The big boxing paydays were gone, and his Vegas earnings couldn't match what he had made as champion. The pressure to maintain his lifestyle while dealing with his tarnished reputation created stress that affected his personal relationships and business decisions. By 1970, Liston was a man caught between worlds, trying to go legitimate while surrounded by the criminal element that had defined his career. After his death, police found a balloon containing heroin in his kitchen and marijuana in his pants, though no syringes were initially reported. Puncture marks were noted on his arms, but the toxicology results remained inconclusive. The investigations raised more questions than they answered, leaving behind a mystery as complex as the man himself. What we know for certain about Liston's death comes down to 4 core facts. His death certificate estimates December 30, 1970 as the date of death, but his body wasn't found until January 5, 1971. Authorities found heroin metabolites in his system and a small quantity of heroin in a balloon in the kitchen, but toxicology was not definitive for a lethal overdose. Puncture marks were reported on his arms, yet multiple acquaintances insisted he feared needles. The official cause included heart and lung failure. His boxing legacy remains split between undeniable accomplishments and persistent controversy. His dominant knockout streak, 2 first-round destructions of Patterson, and legendary jab earned recognition from peers as one of the hardest punchers in heavyweight history. But the clay fights and criminal associations clouded public memory. He was inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame in 1991 and is still ranked among the top heavyweights by analysts today. What do you think? Was the Phantom Punch real, and how did Liston really die? Drop your thoughts in the comments, like and subscribe for more boxing mysteries.